Mr. Howard, appreciate your time. How has Australia's role in the economy changed since when you were leader?
We are seen to have fallen behind in the reform effort. That's the big difference. People a few years ago saw Australia as a country that was always pushing ahead, the frontier of economic reform. But in the last few years, we've started to run on empty when it comes to economic reform. That would be one of the concerns I have. Now, I hope that is beginning to change with the new government.
I'm keen just to get your assessment of the Australian economy right now, because the government's own budgetary forecasts has GDP coming in at 2.5% next year, unemployment at 6.25%, and some of the economists that I speak to seem to say that those forecasts are quite pessimistic. What do you think?
Well, I think it's always a good idea for economic estimates to be on the conservative side, and I hope that your economist friends are right.
No, but the perception is that our economy is doing quite well. House prices are up. There's further evidence that the housing sector is taking the baton on from the mining sector. Consumers are paying off their credit cards. Australians per capita are the wealthiest in the world. So how do you sell a tough budget, or what's perceived to be a tough budget?
Well, you engage people in the common sense explanation that it's going okay at the moment, but unless we take corrective action, future expenditure commitments are going to put an intolerable strain on the budget, and that's why we have to take action to reduce expenditure in some areas to make room for it in other areas, such as the National Disability Scheme and hopefully expenditure in education. Now, we want to do more things, but we don't have the financial wherewithal to do those things without making room for them. And that means curbing expenditure in some areas now where it's unnecessary.
Do you think, however, it's been explained enough? Because a number of consumer confidence surveys, ANZ, Westpac, show that sentiment has been falling since the budget.
It's far too early to suggest that this budget hasn't been sold well. Look, it's a difficult budget because it's the first one of a new term, and I am confident as time goes by there will be an acceptance of the need for the measures that have been taken in this budget.
Do you think it's gone far enough, or has it gone too far for those, in Middle Australia, what was once called Howard battlers?
Well, they're a wonderful group of people, those Howard battlers, and I've retained fond affection for them. They're great people, but I think the budget this time has got the balance right.
Prime Minister Tony Abbott's popularity has fallen according to a number of recent polls. What kind of advice would you give so that he can improve that popularity?
If I were to presume to give advice to Mr Abbott about anything, it would be something I'd do privately.
Are you confident that he's more than a one-term PM?
I think Mr Abbott will turn out to be a very fine Prime Minister. He has already done extremely well in a key policy area, stopping the boats. He's done far better in that than most people expected he would do in a shorter period of time. It's been quite a spectacular achievement.
Now, you're quite successful in negotiating your way through the Senate, especially with the GST. Now, right now, we're seeing the rise in popularity of smaller, more aggressive parties. What would you say to the government to help in their negotiation through the Senate?
I don't think at this stage they need any advice from me. One of the good rules of politics is that when you've been there and you're out of it, you only offer your opinion when it's asked for. And it's far too early to make judgments about negotiating skill and so forth. The GST, which you mentioned, we won the election in October of 1998. It wasn't until the middle of the following year that we finally negotiated that through the Senate, and we went through a few ups and downs and a few rejections. So it's early days, and people shouldn't be starting to score their tennis books on what happens to different things in the budget.
Just briefly on the Racial Discrimination Act, there seems to be some pretty heavy community opposition to it. Do you support it as it is, or do you want to see some changes?
I don't want to get into the detail of it, but I thought that the Bolt case revealed a flaw in the legislation, and I would like to see a change made so that that sort of thing can't happen again. Look, everybody's against discrimination, everybody's against bigotry. We don't want that in Australia. But in the end, you've got to balance that feeling with the need to allow people natural expression and free speech. And providing we get the balance right and it's expressed properly, I think it's a good idea to avoid the sort of thing that happened in the Bolt case.
Mr. Howard, appreciate your time.